The fire was blue. That was the detail that never left him. Not the sound the beast made when it came through the wall. Not the smell of ash that clung to the courtyard for a week after. The color stayed. Deep, impossible blue. The kind that had no business living inside a flame. Bonefire. The disaster responders would call it when they arrived too late. A rare class of flame produced by a rare class of monster that had crawled through a dimensional gateway and arrived in a residential street in the middle of a Tuesday evening. Itsuki Tenma was 7 years old. He had heard the crash from inside the house and run out barefoot. His mother was already caught in it, the flames moving up from her ankles with a kind of patience that made them worse than violent. The creature looming over her was barely more than silhouette and ribcage in the smoke, its chest cavity lit from within by the same cold blue. Tenma tried to cross the courtyard to her. His legs locked. His body understood the danger before he did, and it refused. She turned her head and found him through the fire. Her expression was composed, the specific, deliberate calm she used when she was trying not to frighten him. She said something. The words reached him clearly despite the roar. Walk forward with conviction. Then the flames took her the rest of the way, and there was nothing left. Bonefire consumed matter and whatever sustained matter simultaneously. By morning there was no body to recover, no proof she had existed except for the scorch marks on the stone, and a 7-year-old boy standing in the center of them with tears drying on one cheek. Just one. His right eye cried that night. His left one did not. It never did again, not in the weeks that followed, not in the years after. Something had gone quiet in it, sealed over, as if the grief had calcified behind the pupil. The eye still saw, it just could not weep. And sometimes, late at night, Tenma was aware of something behind it that did not feel entirely his own. A watching quality, a second attention, borrowing the use of the lens. He had learned not to mention that part. 10 years passed, and Itsuki Tenma walked into the Awakening Institute on a gray morning, with 200 other students who were absolutely certain they already knew who they were becoming. This was how the world worked. In broad terms, dimensional gateways called monoliths erupted from the earth without warning, flooding the surrounding territory with creatures called disaster beasts. The beasts ranged from manageable to catastrophic, and the only people equipped to fight them were the awakened, warriors who had undergone an awakening event, manifested combat abilities, and registered under the Savior League to serve as humanity's front line. Saviors were classified by level and grade, from trainee recruits at the bottom to the rarefied special grade fighters at the top, and becoming one started here, at ceremonies like this one, where young people with the potential to awaken were assessed and sorted. Most students had already decided what they would be. Elementalists were the backbone of the alliance. Fire users, lightning users, water shapers, reliable and trainable in large numbers. The class most young saviors expected to fall into. Shikigami users bonded with spirit entities that could, with time and effort, grow beyond the user's own combat power. Order breakers were the strange category. The irregulars, possessing unique Z-rank abilities the ranking system could not cleanly classify. Nobody planned to be an order breaker. That was something that happened to you. A broad-shouldered student named Vance had spent the past 20 minutes telling anyone near him that he expected a high-tier fire result. He wore expensive pre-awakening bracers on both wrists, the kind marketed to students whose families could afford private awakening preparation. He had also said, twice, that level 0 saviors were essentially non-functional, awake but without measurable combat output, still at the baseline of the scale. He aimed the comment at the ceiling, not at anyone in particular, but he said it facing Tenma's direction. Tenma looked at the wall. Students went up one by one to place their palms on the assessment stone at the front of the hall. The stone pulsed a color indicating class and preliminary rank. Vance went third, held the contact for 11 seconds, and received an orange flash. Mid-tier fire elementalist, exactly as predicted. He returned to his seat with the expression of a man fulfilling a destiny he had arranged himself. The hall offered polite applause. Tenma was called last. He crossed the hall without hurrying, set his palm flat on the stone, and waited. A proctor raised her clipboard. A few students turned to watch with the idle attention people give to formalities. The stone split, not cracked, split, a clean fracture running from the contact point outward in both directions, as if something had pressed through from the other side. Blue light poured from the gap, deeper than any elementalist result in the room, and rose above the assessment platform and kept rising. It gathered into a shape, vast, layered, each petal of light unfurling in sequence from the center outward, forming something that looked like a lotus bloom wider than the hall. At the center of the flower, something looked out from a space that was not quite the same room they were standing in. It did not look at the walls or the ceiling, it looked at everything. Two students near the back stepped backward without choosing to. The proctor dropped her clipboard. Vance uncrossed his arms. The light held for 4 seconds. Then it folded inward and was gone, returning into Tenma's chest, and the room was just a room again. The proctor consulted 3 devices before she spoke. Order breaker, she announced, carefully. Unique ability unclassified. Designation, level 0. Vance laughed. Once, brief, deliberate. He turned to the student next to him and said that level 0 order breakers were the most disappointing possible result. All spectacle, no combat rating. Tenma was already moving. 1 step and he stood behind Vance, at the boy's back, having covered 6 meters of hall before the room processed that he had left his position. He did not threaten him. He did not touch him or speak. He simply stood there, and when Vance turned around, the smirk was gone. What replaced it was the involuntary stillness of a body that has recognized something predatory before the brain arrives at the same conclusion. In that exchange, Tenma's ability had already begun its work, reading Vance's awakened energy, cataloging the parameters of the fire ability, pulling the first thread of a counterstructure. He did not need to fight Vance, but the condescension had registered as hostility, and the ability responded to hostility the way a trap responds to pressure. He returned to his chair. Vance said nothing else for the rest of the morning. The monolith struck the east campus wall 40 minutes after the ceremony ended. The impact caved a section of the outer building inward, stone and roof material cascading into the courtyard. The gateway that formed in the gap pulsed gray, the color marking a lesser incursion, beasts in the lower to mid-power range. Gray still meant danger. What stepped through the opening was a bone drake variant. 8 feet of exposed rib and bleached bone. Chest cavity lit from within by bone fire. Crackling blue between its ribs with each slow, heavy step. Level 8. Enough to kill a full team of unprepared students without effort. Students ran for the shelter corridors. Proctors activated the perimeter barriers on intact sections of wall and shouted evacuation instructions into devices that fed the alarm system. Nobody noticed Tenma walking in the other direction. He stopped at the edge of the courtyard and looked at the beast. The color of its fire was familiar in a way that lived behind his left eye. He stepped forward, and the beast found him, and exhaled. The bonefire column hit his arm at full force. It did not simply burn skin. Bonefire struck deeper than skin, at some layer closer to the core of a living thing, and the pain that arrived was the specific, wrong kind that the body does not have a category for. His arm went dark from the elbow down, skin drew tight. Students who had not finished evacuating from the upper floors made sounds he did not register. He held his arm in the stream and did not move back. Over Mimesis needed time. Full data, the energy type, the source mechanics, the propagation pattern of the hostile technique. Partial exposure gave partial counters. Tenma needed the complete picture, and the complete picture cost him the use of a burning arm for however long the analysis required. He paid it and stood still and let the fire run through his concentration like a computation finishing. The blue lotus bloomed. Light expanded from his chest, warm and immediate, and every wound on the arm reversed. Skin sealed. The dark color left the bone. Sensation returned clean, without the phantom ache that usually trailed injury. Mana filled back to capacity. The recovery was total, not healed over, but reset, as if the bonefire had never reached him. In his right hand, something solidified out of dense mana, crystalline, cold without depending on temperature, plates layering over each other in response to his intent rather than instinct. The ability arrived with its own knowledge, black ice wall. He knew how to use it before he had time to examine it. He built it fast across the courtyard, 3 angled layers, each surface positioned to redirect rather than absorb the beast's next breath. The bone drake exhaled again. The flame sheeted sideways off the deflecting face and dissipated against the campus wall. The creature slammed its body into the construct, and the construct held, and each impact fed data back into the ice's parameters, every blow reinforcing the structure rather than wearing it. 2 seconds of that. Then Tenma reshaped the ice. It shifted under his direction from barrier to blade, the dense crystalline material reorganizing in the space of a breath, extending into a form taller than the beast itself. He drove it across the horizontal. The bone drake went in 2 pieces. The courtyard went quiet. Debris settled. The gateway behind the carcass pulsed once and closed. Tenma lowered his arm and let the black ice wall dissolve. On the 3rd floor of the east building, visible through a window that had lost its glass in the initial impact, Vance stood looking down at the wreckage. He did not move. He did not speak. He had the expression of a person rapidly reorganizing a large number of recently held assumptions. The man who crossed the courtyard toward him while the proctors were still working out their incident protocol wore a Northern Command insignia on his collar, the specific mark of a field-grade executive, not administrative staff. His name was Menu Izumi. Among saviors, that name had weight. He was the Northern Commander, responsible for defense operations across the continent's entire northern sector, and he was the mentor of Jin Taiwa, the strongest active combat savior in recorded Alliance history, the man whose name had become shorthand for the upper limit of what a human fighter could be. Menu sat across from Tenma in the now empty assessment hall, set a cup of water on the table, and asked about his left eye. Tenma told him. He kept it short and factual. The beast, the bonfire, the courtyard, his mother, what his left eye had stopped doing afterward. The presence behind it that he could not fully account for. The one thing he wanted from every disaster beast he encountered. Their complete and permanent destruction, without exception. Menu was quiet for a while after he finished. He looked at Tenma with the specific focus of a man who has been carrying a decision toward a moment and has just arrived at it. He told Tenma he wanted to take him as his personal disciple. Tenma asked why, if the ability was still unclassified and his combat level was 0. Menu said it was not the ability he was recruiting. Ability could be trained. What could not be trained was standing in bonfire with a burning arm and holding position until the analysis completed. That was not technique. That was something installed at a different level, and either a person had it or they did not. Tenma had it. Menu had been looking for it for some time. Tenma agreed. Ageha Izumi was waiting outside the hall. Menu's daughter, a year ahead of Tenma in her progression, already cleared to 2nd grade. Her bonded Shikigami was a large jade-colored butterfly that moved with her like a shadow and could manifest blade-edged wing constructs in close combat that hit significantly harder than the creature's appearance suggested. She looked Tenma over with the careful attention of someone forming an opinion they know will need revision. She asked about Over Mimesis. He explained, it absorbed hostile techniques through sustained exposure, generated absolute counters when the analysis completed, and fully restored him in the process. His body converted earned XP into physical karma stones rather than absorbing it as level progression. He would stay at level 0 indefinitely. Everything he built through what he could take and analyze. Ageha turned this over for a moment. She told him that was either the most dangerous ability she had ever heard described, or the most reckless possible combat philosophy, and she could not quite determine which. He told her it was just how he worked. She didn't quite smile, but the reservation in her expression became something closer to actual attention, and she stopped holding back her full interest in the conversation. 3 days after his discipleship began, Menu sent him to a stage. The Level 10 training facility in District 3's eastern sector was an artificial monolith built specifically for high-tier trainee assessments. Sealed, timed, regulated in difficulty, with a public leaderboard the Alliance had maintained for over a decade. The current record at the top of the board had been set 11 years ago by Jin Taiwa, 12 minutes and 41 seconds. No one had come within 3 minutes of it since. It had become less a record and more a fixed point, the kind of number people cited as proof of what the ceiling looked like. Menu told Tenma to go in, survive the encounter, and come back out. He did not mention the leaderboard. He pointed at the entrance and said the timer was running. Tenma went in alone. The chamber inside was broad, the walls streaked with faint bioluminescent growth, the air heavy with mineral humidity. At the center stood the obstacle, a self-regenerating colossus, 4 meters of compressed earth and stone, rated at level 10, standard difficulty for a full party of 2nd-grade saviors with coordinated tactics. It moved the instant it registered Tenma. The first swing connected before he cleared the arc and drove him into the wall hard enough to leave an impression in the stone. He peeled himself free and reassessed from a crouch. The Colossus's entire design was built around one mechanic. It pulled repair material from the stone substrate of the chamber floor, reversing surface damage in seconds. Sequential attacks, no matter how powerful, exhausted the attacker before they could outdamage the regeneration cycle. The stage was designed to make parties think about strategy rather than raw output. Tenma had no party, no meaningful attack output, and no standard strategy. The first 4 minutes went to learning the creature's rhythm. He absorbed strikes when he had to, used the black ice wall to blunt the worst impacts when he had the angle, and let the combat data accumulate while he moved around the chamber. He was mapping the regeneration, where it drew from, how the sequence ordered itself, what the internal structure looked like during each repair phase. Lotus was building data. By minute 5, it had partial coverage. By minute 6, it had enough. The bloom came at 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Full restoration, mana at capacity. The new counter arrived complete. Lotus burst. He understood it immediately. Pressurize the internal mana reserve, allow it to expand outward simultaneously in all directions, force and radius scaling with committed mana and repetition. He committed everything he had. The blast did not choose a direction. It went outward from his center in every angle at once, reaching all surfaces within a 3-meter radius simultaneously. The Colossus could handle sequential damage. It repaired each impact individually as they arrived, working through the queue efficiently. What it had no protocol for was every surface of its body struck at the exact same instant. The repair cycle could not process inputs it could not sequence. The regeneration stalled. The Colossus came apart. Stone pieces spread across the chamber floor like the aftermath of something structural failing. The timer stopped. 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Tenma walked out of the exit. The receptionist at the processing desk, the same woman who had checked him in with the particular measured look she gave every level 0 registrant, processed his identification chit and then went still. She looked at her screen. She looked at his chit. She looked at the screen again. Jin Taiwa's record, 11 years undisturbed, now sat in second place. She assembled herself, produced the official record setter certification card, and handed it to him, with the careful neutrality of someone who has just revised a large assumption in a very short time frame. Outside, Menu was waiting. Tenma held up a small green stone, smooth, rounded, pulsing faintly with interior light, found on the chamber floor near the end of the fight. He had not known what it was. Menu took it and turned it over slowly. His expression shifted. He told Tenma it was a karma stone, the physical form of XP his body could not absorb into the fixed level 0 status. Green was intermediate grade, roughly 3,000 experience points compressed into an object smaller than a plum. Blue stones ran to 10,000. The stones did not disappear, and they were not wasted. They simply sat in a form that his specific ability class could eventually use through a different mechanism than standard level growth. Tenma asked how many he had produced over his life without realizing. Menu closed his hand around the stone. He told Tenma that was exactly the question, and to get the answer they needed to run him through significantly harder stages, at a pace no standard trainee was put through. The arrangements were already made. District 4. Tenma had heard of District 4. He had heard of its ward chief and the ward chief's son, a young man who went by Rei, who was known in alliance circles as someone who purchased his qualification results and used his family's local authority as a personal enforcement arm. The kind of person who measured his own worth and how thoroughly he could inconvenience others. Tenma pocketed the karma stone. He told Menu he was ready to leave whenever Menu was. Menu studied him for a moment, something unreadable behind his eyes. Then he nodded and started walking. District 4 operated under a specific atmosphere Tenma noticed the moment he arrived. The quiet of a place where one family's authority had been running unchallenged long enough that people had stopped questioning whether it should. The Kinoshita name was visible without being written anywhere, in how the stage registration staff moved when Rai's men were nearby, in the section of the waiting area that no one sat in unless invited, minor corruptions, each one small enough to seem incidental, stacking into something that shaped the air. Raji Kinoshita, Rai, to everyone, was 20 years old, and had registered as a lightning elementalist. His actual combat credentials were mediocre for someone billing himself as a qualifier contender, but his father administered the district's ward office, which meant local stage registrations, advanced training slot allocations, and territorial performance reports all ran through people who answered to the family. Rai did not need to be strong. He needed other people's applications to get quietly buried. Tenma's application had been filed through Northern Command channels by Menu, a bureaucratic override that left no local office with the authority to lose it. When Tenma arrived at the advanced registration desk and set down his documentation, the clerk processed it correctly and issued the access tokens without hesitation. 2 men appeared at his shoulder before he reached the exit. The larger one was named Takeru Oga, and he was built with the specific proportions of someone who had spent years on their physical foundation before layering an awakened ability on top of it. His class was Metal Materialization Elementalist. He could coat every surface of his body in a high-density titanium alloy, hardness sufficient to blunt standard attacks without active effort from the user. Full coverage, continuous, no gaps. He explained this to Tenma in the registration corridor, calmly, in the manner of someone who had used the explanation before as a deterrent. The second man stood off to Takeru's right, with his hands loose at his sides, and said nothing. Tenma listened to the explanation about the alloy. He asked one question, whether the coating was applied simultaneously across every surface or directed region by region. Every surface, continuous coverage, Takeru confirmed. That was the data Tenma needed. He had been reading Takeru's mana expenditure pattern since the approach. The analysis was nearly complete. He let Takeru throw the first strike. The hit connected with his shoulder and drove him into the wall. On contact, Tenma felt the composition of the alloy, density, absorption coefficient, the materialization sequence under impact. The Blue Lotus took the rest and accelerated to completion. Recovery came fast, full mana. The new ability formed in his hand, a sphere roughly the size of his fist, deep green, rotating slowly in his palm, piercing true sphere. Its function arrived in him complete. The projectile moved through defensive layers without registering them as obstacles. No physical barrier, no energy shield, no materialized alloy interrupted its path. It found whatever was behind the defense and hit that. He threw it. The sphere passed through Takeru's metallic coating the way light moves through water. No resistance, no deflection. It struck the arm underneath and the arm did not survive the impact. Takeru hit the floor of the corridor, making a sound that cut off all ambient noise in the building. The alloy coating dissipated. His right arm from the elbow down was gone. The quiet man beside him had started to move. He stopped when Tenma looked at him. Rei was at the corridor's far end, the rings on his fingers catching the overhead light, lightning cracking lazily between his knuckles as a display. He had positioned himself slightly behind his men, as he usually did, while wearing the expression of someone leading them. He looked at Tenma now with the particular fury of a person who has never been genuinely inconvenienced before and does not yet have a word for what he is feeling. Tenma walked past him and out of the building. The advanced rock lizard stage was straightforward by comparison. The beasts inside were earth-based, their hides dense enough to shrug off most elemental output. Tenma ran the piercing true sphere through 4 of them in sequence, each high defense kill feeding back into the orb's parameters. By the exit, the sphere's flight speed had increased and its impact radius had expanded. The ability logged the change itself, level 2. Higher defense targets accelerated its development faster than standard kills. He noted that and moved to the next stage. The Infinite Locust Swarm was listed on the District 4 board with a specific note advising solo trainee entrants that the encounter was not calibrated for individual clearance at their grade. The stage's primary threat was not any single creature but the aggregate. Tens of thousands of locust-type beasts in coordinated formations, directed by a Queen-class entity that broadcast guidance signals through a precise mana frequency, coordinating the swarm the way a signal coordinates receivers. The registration staff saw Tenma's level 0 designation and told him the difficulty was above his recommended parameters. He said he understood that and asked for the entry token. They issued it. He went in alone. The sound hit him first. 10,000 wings moving simultaneously. A wall of noise that was more pressure than audio. The swarm was already aware of him, the first rotating column peeling off from the mass and converging, before he had crossed 10 meters. Tenma moved through the opening formations without deploying any defense, letting contact happen at low intensity, mapping the attack logic and the Queen's broadcast pattern as it came through the swarm's coordinated movements. Finding the Queen required navigating through a cloud of hostile bodies dense enough to reduce visibility to near zero. He used the piercing true sphere as a tracking tool, firing it through the mass and reading what the swarm routed around, building a map of the absence shapes that indicated where they were protecting something. At 17 minutes, he found her. She was motionless near the chamber's center, the eye of the storm, translucent wings flat against a plated body the size of a large dog, utterly still. She was not fighting, she was broadcasting. The coordination signal pulsed from her in steady intervals, and Tenma had been analyzing that frequency for the entire run. He had its structure, its source mechanics, its composition. The Blue Lotus bloomed, recovery, full mana. The new ability arrived not as a weapon but as a layer of perception, mana sense, extending outward from his body and reading the surrounding environment through the signatures living things produced. He could feel the Queen's broadcast now rather than observe it. He could trace individual swarm members through the cloud by the mana they carried, detect the residual impressions left in spaces that bodies had recently occupied. He fired the sphere at the Queen once. The swarm collapsed. Without the signal, coordination vanished. Individual locusts losing direction, falling into disorganized motion, bumping against each other in the sudden absence of instruction. The mass dispersed into noise. The stage timer stopped. 17 minutes. The previous record, on the board outside, was 43. Ageha was waiting on a stone bench near the exit, a book open in her lap that she was not reading, her jade butterfly perched on the bench back. She stood when the door opened. There was a man standing between them. He was leaning against the wall beside the door with a pear in his hand, eating it with the relaxed manner of someone who had been waiting a while and found the wait acceptable. He wore a long hunting coat, had a chain looped around his left wrist, and at the end of the chain was a collar, and the collar was attached to a wolf crouched at his feet. Black, one ear torn at the tip, amber eyes that tracked Tenma as the door opened without the wolf moving any other part of its body. The man said Rei had sent him. He mentioned that Ageha had kept him company while he waited. Ageha's posture was controlled, but her jade butterfly had shifted from the bench to her shoulder with its wings angled forward. She was working to keep her expression steady. His name was Charles, though he operated as the Hound in the circles that hired him. A Shikigami user, the wolf, the Death Hound, his bonded entity, was rated well above what a standard first-grade savior should be facing. The chain at his wrist was decorative. The bond was not. He finished the pair, dropped the core, and told Tenma the terms. Withdraw all stage registrations from District 4, do not return, and they could discuss whether the current situation required further action. His voice was pleasant in the specific way that people with leverage allow themselves to be pleasant. Tenma looked at the wolf. He walked toward it. Charles straightened. He said stop. When Tenma did not stop, the wolf rose from its crouch and a sound came from its chest. Not quite a growl, something below that, felt more than heard. Charles said stop again, and his tone was no longer pleasant. The hound's chain grew taut. Tenma crouched and placed his palm on the wolf's head. Contact. The Death Hound's mana composition opened to his analysis. The Shikigami bond, the control structure Charles maintained through the chain, the command hierarchy built into the entity at its foundation. Over Mimesis read Shikigami control the same way it read any hostile system, as a structure with inputs that could be displaced. He had been building data since the moment he spotted the wolf through the exit door's glass. The bloom came. Full recovery. Shikigami Eater settled into his hands, immediate and complete. Physical contact with a bonded entity allowed him to overlay the existing control bond with his own, in a single transfer, the original connection severed at the source. He was already touching the wolf. The override occurred in the space between one breath and the next. The chain went slack. Charles looked at it. He looked at the wolf. The wolf turned its head from Tenma toward Charles, and something in its amber eyes was different now. The same eyes, the same wolf, but what directed it was not what had directed it before. Charles said its name. He said it in the voice of someone trying to reissue a command that no longer has a destination. Tenma told the wolf to go home. It moved toward Charles. Charles stepped back once. The second step did not happen. When it was over, Tenma looked at Ageha. She looked back at him. Her jade butterfly folded its wings. She asked, in a voice that was doing a great deal of quiet structural work, whether he had known that would function before he walked toward it. He told her he had been fairly confident. She told him that was not as reassuring as he seemed to think it was. She sat back down on the bench and breathed for a moment, and Tenma sat beside her and did not fill the silence until she was ready for it. Iberia arrived 20 minutes later at a slight jog, a crumpled paper bag tucked under his arm, his hair suggesting he had recently been somewhere dusty. He was 18, a year older than Tenma, with the frame of someone who had trained seriously and the manner of someone who had not yet developed the instinct to take himself seriously. Wind and water elementalist, with a secondary capability in mana-based healing, low-grade but precise. His father was Aiden, the artisan king of the north, renowned across all 5 continents for producing unique class artifacts that other craftsmen spent entire careers attempting to reverse engineer. He was also the warmest person Tenma had encountered since arriving in District 4, by a distance that was not close. He pulled a spirit scroll out of the bag, slightly crumpled at one edge, as if it had traveled badly, and crouched beside Ageha to apply the recovery. The scroll was high-grade, well above what standard healing techniques produced. Ageha's color returned quickly. She told him he did not have to use something that valuable. Iberia said his father could make 20 more without breaking stride, and told her to stop worrying about the scroll. He introduced himself to Tenma with the directness of someone who had already formed a position on a person before the handshake finished. He said he had heard about the Locust Swarm record. He said it the way someone announces a conclusion. Tenma asked what the conclusion was. Iberia told him he wanted to enter the Savior Alliance qualifiers as partners. The regional tournament ran in 3 weeks. Stage 1 required registered pairs, and the partner format opened higher-tier trial access than solo registration allowed. He had been looking, he said, for someone who would make the bracket worth attending. Tenma asked why him. Iberia gestured at the stage exit behind Tenma, where the Locust record was still populating on the board visible through the door glass. Tenma considered it. The qualifiers fed directly into formal alliance ranking, the path from trainee through 2nd grade and eventually toward 1st, which was the precondition for special grade assessment. Menu's instruction had been to accelerate stage progression by any viable means. The qualifiers were stages with resistance designed in. He said he was willing. Iberia grinned, wide, unguarded, younger looking for it, and put out his fist. Tenma looked at it for a moment and then bumped it. Ageha watched this exchange with the expression of someone quietly cataloging something unexpected. The 3 of them left the stage district together. As the afternoon went overcast, Iberia explaining the qualifier bracket structure and what he knew of the other registered contenders. Ageha corrected his information at intervals. Tenma listened and asked one question every several minutes that reorganized everything Iberia had just said. By the time they reached the main road, Iberia had abandoned explanation in favor of simply answering directly. At some point, Iberia asked what Tenma was actually after, past the stages and the rankings and the record numbers. The real aim, Tenma told him, disaster beasts had killed his mother when he was 7. He intended to become someone capable of ending every disaster beast he encountered for as long as he lived, and that required becoming someone the Alliance could not sideline for operational reasons. Iberia took that in without the expressions people usually produced when Tenma said something about his mother. He nodded once, as if the answer had confirmed something he had suspected. He said his father had told him once that being kind without being strong was only kindness up to the moment you could not protect what mattered, and after that, it became something that felt worse than uselessness. He had been working out how to be both things at the same time. They walked without speaking for a while. Then Iberia asked if Tenma wanted to see the new application he had been developing for his wind technique, because he needed an honest second opinion. Ageha always said it looked fine, which he had decided meant she was being diplomatic. Ageha said it looked fine. Iberia said that was exactly what she always said. Tenma told him to show it. The Savior Alliance qualifier ran across 2 stages over 3 days. Stage 1 placed participants in a shared combat environment with a gate-crossing objective at the far end. Stage 2 was a scored monster hunting format. Points per kill, difficulty tiers, 6 phases of escalating targets. Both stages were open to any registered awakened fighter who cleared the baseline entry criteria, which made the participant pool large. Rei had filled it. He had registered over 800 fighters with some form of arrangement to his faction, and he had made a specific deal with a significant portion of them. In exchange for payment, they would form a physical blockade across Stage 1's gate corridor, preventing Tenma from advancing. Not a fight on paper, just an obstruction. 200 bodies standing between Tenma and the threshold crossing that the stage rules required. It was the kind of tactic that worked against most opponents, because most opponents would not escalate a 200-person confrontation in a public tournament environment. Rei had not seen what Lotus Burst looked like in open terrain. Stage 1 opened. Tenma and Iberia cleared the first half of the course without contact. The general pool of participants kept distance. Nobody interested in engaging a pair that had entered with the momentum of a back-to-back record streak. Then the blockade materialized across the width of the plateau, a formation too dense to navigate around without losing the time advantage. Rei was visible at its rear, lightning cycling between his hands. He said something to the men near him, and the formation tightened. Tenma looked at the distance to the formation. He looked at the terrain on both flanks, confirming the coverage was complete. He told Iberia to step back and put up his wind barrier. Iberia moved back 3 paces, and a curved wind construct went up in front of him. Tenma released Lotus Burst at roughly 60% of current capacity, aimed at the formation's center mass. The ability had grown since the first use in the training stage. Weeks of stage clears had expanded the radius with each detonation, the scaling mechanic built into the skill accumulating quietly with every cast. The blast that went out now swept across the front rows of the blockade before anyone braced, the pressure wave continuing through the secondary rows behind it. Fighters at the formation's edges caught the outer boundary and went down regardless. The trailing force was still enough to drop anyone without a dedicated defense construct. Where there had been a formation, there were scattered people and a wide-open approach to the gate. Rei was still standing. He had moved the moment the blast began, fast for a lightning user, and caught himself on elevated terrain to the right. His composure had come apart. He looked at the plateau, at the people on it, and then at Tenma walking through the center of what remained of the blockade. He cut across to intercept. Lightning gathered at both arms, the discharge significant enough to ionize the air in a visible crescent around him. He said this was not finished, with the conviction of someone who needed it to be true. What followed was not a fair fight. Rei's lightning was genuinely fast, precisely thrown, above what most trainee-level opponents could handle. The first strike hit Tenma's forearm, and the pain was real and sharp. He took the second strike. The third. The Blue Lotus tracked the frequency, and by the fourth hit, the analysis was complete. Thunder wave formed in his legs. A speed and agility technique extracted from the same lightning frequency, translated into movement. The fifth strike came in, and Tenma was not in front of it. He was behind Rei, inside the reaction distance, where a lightning technique designed for mid-range had nothing to work with. Tenma took Rei apart methodically, not fast but completely, in the deliberate way that communicated something beyond the result. By the time Iberia and Ageha crossed the gate threshold, the lightning had stopped. Rei was on the ground, looking up. He had the expression of someone who has spent their entire life standing in a building that has just revealed it was never standing at all. The gate registered the crossing, Stage 1 complete. Tenma and Iberia advanced to Stage 2. Stage 2 opened on broken terrain, a wide quarry-type landscape with poor sightlines, boulders the size of transport vehicles stacked in irregular formations, and no clean approaches to anything. The scoring format was direct. Kill targets, accumulate points, difficulty scaling with each of the 6 phases. The time limit was generous on paper and brutal in practice, because the point thresholds for meaningful placement required running through all 6 phases without pause. Most registered pairs entered Stage 2 treating it as a marathon. Tenma and Iberia entered it as a sprint. The first 3 phases were standard, mid-tier beasts, coordinated in small packs, manageable for a competent pair with elemental coverage. Iberia's wind technique handled formations cleanly, separating clustered groups into individuals before Tenma moved through them with the piercing True Sphere. By Phase 3's completion, their combined score already cleared the threshold most pairs targeted for their final total. Phase 4 brought the Purgatory Giants. Each one stood 4 meters tall, built dense from a material that sat halfway between organic and stone, joints that did not bend at the angles joints were supposed to bend at. Nightmare class designation. the bracket just below the catastrophic tier, rated for special grade saviors in coordinated deployment. There were 6 of them distributed across the terrain, 1 per sector, each worth the equivalent of a minor stage clear in points. The stage administrators had placed them as Phase 4's ceiling, expecting most pairs to score partial credit by defeating 1 or 2 before the time compression of Phase 5 forced a transition. Tenma had been running the stage since Phase 1 with 1 additional variable active. The Thunderwave speed enhancement extracted from Rei's lightning, fully integrated into his movement now. With it, crossing the distance between sectors took seconds rather than minutes. He cleared the first giant in under 3 minutes. The piercing true sphere had developed enough from the qualifier fights that a sustained barrage outpaced the creature's damage threshold before it could adapt its positioning. The second giant went down faster. The first had provided enough data on their defensive structure to optimize the approach angle. Iberia held perimeter on each engagement, wind barriers preventing interference, and called the sector positions in rapid sequence. He had a navigator's instinct for terrain, reading the quarry's layout from a single pass through it earlier in the run. Tenma hit each sector as Iberia called it. 6 giants, 22 minutes. Phases 5 and 6 were the stage's intended difficulty peak. The administrator's assumption had been that competing pairs would arrive at them depleted, reduced in mana and coordination, working through accumulated attrition. Tenma arrived at Phase 5 at full mana. The Blue Lotus recovery mechanics reset him after each analysis cycle, and 6 giants had given the Lotus significant material to work with. 4 minor counter principles, 2 complete ability refinements, and a broken critical crystal interaction that was starting to stack in a direction worth noting. Phase 5 and 6 cleared in sequence. The stage closed. The national leaderboard refreshed outside in the staging hall, visible through the scoring windows. Pairs and solo entries from 5 districts were ranked in real time. The top entry sat at 47,000 points. A pair from the Central Alliance sector running their 3rd consecutive qualifier. Tenma and Iberia's combined score populated above it, 112,000 points. The staging hall was not a quiet place during active scoring windows. It became quiet. Several proctors converged on the scoring terminal, presumably to verify the input. A pair of participants near the window who had been celebrating a personal record looked up at the board and said nothing for a long while. Iberia looked at the number and then looked at Tenma with an expression that suggested he wanted to react more dramatically but was not sure where to start. Tenma told him they should find food. He had not eaten since that morning. Iberia said they had just taken first place nationally, and he wanted to acknowledge that before they discussed lunch. Tenma said they could do both at the same time. They did. Menu's message arrived 2 days later, flagged urgent in a channel that did not typically carry personal communications. A man in the South Continent called Bargar had a gift that the Alliance treated with the specific reluctant respect reserved for things too accurate to dismiss. Prophetic ability, imprecise in geography but exact in timing, the kind that had predicted 3 of the last 5 major demon incursions within a 48-hour window. Bargar had sent a communication to the Northern Command. He predicted a mass demon assault on northern civilian sectors within 3 days. Menu did not call Tenma back to headquarters. He sent instructions forward. Iberia had family in the northern forest districts, specifically his father Aiden, the artisan king of the north, who maintained a workshop in a forested compound an hour outside the district's main settlement. Aiden did not live in protected city zones by choice. He found the layout of urban workshops incompatible with his process, which required both the specific acoustics of forest stone construction and an uninterrupted distance from the kind of visitor who arrived with commissions rather than appointments. Menu's assessment was direct. If demon forces were targeting northern infrastructure and personnel, Aiden was a high-value target. The artifacts he produced were the kind that changed the outcome of engagements, and a craftsman capable of making them was worth more to an organized enemy than almost any structural target they could hit. He wanted Tenma and Iberia at the compound before the 3-day window opened. They traveled overnight. The workshop was a low building extended by several attached structures, stone-walled, the main hall smelling of hot metal and something resinous that Iberia said was specific to the particular alloy his father used for unique class substrate work. Aiden was at a workbench when they arrived, a magnifying eyepiece pushed up onto his forehead, examining something too small to identify from the doorway. He was a compact man, mid-50s, with the kind of forearms that came from decades of physical craft and the quiet authority of someone whose competence in one narrow domain had expanded outward until it covered most things. He looked up when Iberia came in, noted Tenma with the rapid complete assessment glance of a professional evaluator, and returned to the workbench without breaking his examination. He told Iberia he had been expecting them and that the rice was already on, if they were hungry. Iberia said they had eaten. Aiden said he had put on extra anyway. He set the piece he had been examining down on the bench, a fragment of something crystalline, translucent green, roughly the size and shape of a split almond. He beckoned Tenma over and held it up to the light, turning it slowly. He asked Tenma if he knew what a broken critical crystal was. Tenma said no. Aiden explained, the artifact was a flawed piece, unique class in its potential but rejected during assessment because its core mechanism ran contrary to every growth model the Alliance used for standard saviors. The crystal accumulated permanent critical hit rate by stacking the offensive differential between the user and defeated targets. The greater the gap between the enemy's attack power and the user's level, the faster the rate climbed. Once fully stacked, it guaranteed critical strikes at 10 times normal damage. The flaw was the condition. It only worked for users who never leveled up. The moment the user crossed level 0 into level 1, the accumulation mechanism broke and the crystal became inert. An artifact designed for an awakener who stayed permanently at baseline. A category every standard classification model assumed did not exist in any practical sense. He pressed it into Tenma's palm and closed Tenma's fingers around it. He said he had been waiting 15 years to find someone this would actually work on. Josuke arrived through the back of the workshop while Aiden was speaking, heavy-set, deliberate in his movement, the particular economy of someone who had spent 20 years in continuous close protection work. He was Aiden's personal bodyguard and had been for long enough that the two men communicated in partial sentences and confirmed acknowledgments. He gave Tenma the same assessment look as Aiden had, briefer, with a different component to it, more operational, noting exits rather than caliber. He sat down and said the perimeter sensors on the northern approach had flagged something 6 hours ago that he did not like the pattern of. Aiden said he knew. The first gateway opened in the sky above the tree line just before dawn on the second day. It was not one. By the time the light was fully up, 7 gateways hung above the northern district, spaced across the terrain at intervals that were not accidental, positioned to maximize the coverage zone for beast dispersion, overlapping in a way that closed the gaps between individual incursion areas. Demon-directed placement, not the random eruption pattern of natural monolith events. Tenma left the workshop at speed when the civilian alarm activation came through Josuke's communication channel. A fire-type beast, designated Flame Golem, level 21, a creature of solidified flame and mineral crust, had cleared the settlement's outer barrier and was moving through a residential block. He reached it in 4 minutes. The golem was large enough that its movement left char trails on the road surface. A family was in a building it was approaching. 2 adults, 3 children, at a second-floor window. The golem had not yet registered them, its threat detection running on movement and heat signatures at close proximity. Tenma put himself in its detection range. The golem turned toward him. He built the black ice wall across the road, thick, angled to redirect the fire it discharged. The flame sheeted off the surface and the golem advanced, putting its full weight into the construct. Tenma let it push and held the analysis open. The fire it used was different from bone fire, direct combustion, mineral accelerated, heavy on the radiant component. The Lotus had seen fire mechanics before. Analysis ran fast. The bloom came at full recovery. Black Ice Wall had extended its resistance parameters. This variant of fire was now inside the known and countered category, meaning the construct would handle it passively, rather than requiring active engagement. He drove the ice through the golem from 3 directions simultaneously, closing the angles until the mineral crust fractured under compression. The golem went out. The family at the second-floor window had not moved. He was gone before any of them found the words to say something. He was back at the workshop 20 minutes later. Iberia met him at the perimeter and told him to move fast. The beasts that had come through the northern gateway were already in the tree line, and 2 of them had entered the compound's outer fence. They went in together. The workshop compound was 3 structures connected by covered walkways. The beasts inside had come from a green-tier gateway, the classification that designated intelligent commander-grade creatures, level 26 to 50, capable of tactical judgment and coordinated attack. These were not animals following instinct. They read the terrain, identified structural weaknesses, and adjusted when a strategy failed. Two of them had occupied the main workshop. Iberia drew both out into the yard with a wind lance that struck loud and visible, pulling their attention, while Tenma came in from the east walkway and hit the first from an angle it had not assigned threat value to. The piercing true sphere went through its hide without the creature's defensive coating registering the trajectory in time. 1. The second was more careful. It repositioned immediately when its companion went down, putting the workshop wall to its back and narrowing the approach angles. Iberia's wind technique was not penetrating its outer layer. The hide was denser, the energy composition resilient to external force. Tenma began the analysis cycle, taking the creature's strikes and building the counter picture. The third beast came from the roof. It dropped on Tenma from directly above, which the mana sense detected half a second before impact, enough to shift his angle so the full weight landed across his shoulder and back, rather than direct to his head. The force drove him into the ground, and the analysis cycle fractured. He pushed the creature off and reset. A green tier gateway meant the ceiling of this incursion was level 50. The creature on the roof was level 34. Intelligent, patient in a way the lower tier beasts were not, and aware that something about Tenma's analysis process required sustained contact. It began managing distance, keeping him at the edge of its reach rather than committing to a sustained assault, preventing the analysis from building into a complete picture. Tenma changed the approach. He stopped trying to take its full attacks and started taking partial contacts, glancing strikes, clipped edges of its offense, fragments of data arriving slower but arriving. The Lotus built the counter piece by piece. At the seventh contact, something shifted in his body. The broken critical crystal, hanging at his chest on the cord Aiden had threaded through it, flared warm. He could feel the count, the attack differential between a level 34 beast and a level 0 fighter stacking at a rate the artifact had clearly been hungry for. The crystal's temperature kept climbing across each contact. At the ninth hit, the flow state opened. He felt it as a narrowing, not of awareness but of everything outside it, the yard and the sound of Iberia's technique in the background, and the texture of the ground, all of it becoming peripheral, while the combat space became the only real geography. All attributes climbed. His speed shifted into a different bracket. His precision went from practiced to absolute, and the broken critical crystal hit its threshold. The guaranteed crit. 10 times normal damage, waiting on the next strike that landed. He closed the distance before the level 34 could reset its spacing. The piercing true sphere went out at point-blank range, and on impact, the crystal's accumulation discharged. The beast came apart. Not the way the lesser creatures had come apart under previous strikes, cleanly, structurally. It came apart the way something does when the force applied to it exceeds its coherence by an order of magnitude. Pieces scattered across the yard. Iberia looked at the result from across the compound. He was quiet for a long moment. He told Tenma that he was starting to understand why Menu had been so specific about him. Tenma checked the crystal's temperature, already building again. The deficit between level 0 and this difficulty bracket was vast, and the artifact was accumulating the differential with every combat contact. Josuke came out of the workshop side door and told them Aiden was secured in the interior room and the compound perimeter was clear. The ground shook. Not a beast impact, something different, heavier, distributed, as if multiple large objects had landed simultaneously at the compound's boundaries. The perimeter sensor on Josuke's channel fired 3 alerts in rapid sequence. Tenma turned toward the northern tree line. 3 figures emerged from the edge of the forest. Not beasts. The distinction was clear even at distance. The way they moved, upright, deliberate, with the specific purposefulness of entities that had been told where to go and why. A demon general, a flame demon, and a white ogre, the composition of a strike team, not a foraging incursion. They had not come through the gateways by accident. They had been sent. The one at the center stopped at the edge of the compound and looked at the workshop building with the focused attention of something that had been given a specific destination and was confirming arrival. The workshop was that destination. Josuke said Aiden's name, low and immediate. Behind them, through the walls of the interior room, came the sound of something vast and cold, settling over the space where Aiden had been standing. The Shadow General moved first. It crossed the compound perimeter before Josuke's alert finished, a cold displacement of air marking its path rather than visible movement, the kind of speed that did not announce itself. It was through the interior room door before any of them reached the corridor. There was a single impact sound from inside, nothing prolonged, and then silence. When Tenma hit the door, it was already settled. Aiden stood against the far wall, or stood was not quite accurate. He was held against it, encased from the waist down in a crystalline black compound that had hardened on contact. A binding technique, immobilizing rather than injuring, preserving the target intact. His expression was controlled in the specific way of a man assessing options rather than losing himself to the situation. He said, in a voice that had not shifted from his ordinary register by more than a fraction, that he could not feel anything below his chest. The general stood at the room's center with one hand extended, maintaining the binding's cohesion. It was tall, above what the green tier incursion ceiling should have produced, built with a skeletal structure that moved wrong, bones arranged by something with different priorities than human anatomy. Its designation sat in the space between the green tier's upper limit and the category the Alliance did not yet have a comfortable name for. Josuke went in. He hit the general with everything he had carried across 2 decades of close protection work. Sustained, controlled, angled at the openings a man who knew dangerous things learned to find. The general absorbed the first exchange, adjusted, and returned force with the economy of something that was not angry about being hit. It was calculating the cost. Tenma moved to Aiden, and Iberia was already there, his wind technique working at the binding compound's surface, searching for a seam or an edge in the material. It had neither. The compound was uniform, seamless, hardened beyond what his output could erode at any speed that mattered. Outside, the flame demon and the white ogre had cleared the perimeter. He could hear the ogre working through the outer wall in sustained rhythmic impacts. Josuke could not split himself between the general inside and the ogre at the wall. Tenma told Iberia to keep working on the binding and went back out. The flame demon was in the yard. It was constructed differently from the golem in the settlement. That had been mineral and combustion, a natural process accelerated into a body. This was intentional, a creature shaped by something that understood what fire was and had chosen to embody the version of it that left the least behind. Its flames were red, deep in spectrum, and the heat it radiated distorted the air visibly in a 4-meter radius around its body. It looked at Tenma the way things with intelligence looked at obstructions that did not warrant full attention. It said, in something that arrived in his understanding without quite being speech, that it could sense his level, 0. It said he was at the wrong point in his development to be in this fight. Tenma walked toward it. The first column hit him full center. Red fire worked on a different principle from what he had analyzed before. Not burning surface tissue, but restructuring at the cellular level, the damage accumulating faster than organic recovery could offset. The Lotus began reading it and found the composition genuinely novel. Existing fire counter data did not cover this cleanly. He needed full exposure. He let the second column hit him. The third. The demon seemed to find his continued standing offensive. The attacks became more varied, each aimed at a different axis, searching for the approach that would collapse him. The compound yard scorched outward from where he stood, stone cracking under the thermal expansion of the surface. The broken critical crystal climbed steadily through each contact. By the 7th strike, the blue lotus bloomed. The recovery was total. Every system returning to baseline in a single pulse, 7 fire column hits erased. What came with it was not a new ability. It was an expansion of what already existed. Black ice wall erupted outward from him in 3 simultaneous directions, the construct building into a form larger and denser than anything he had produced before. The cold it generated working on the same molecular register as the red fire, running the thermodynamic process in direct reverse. The flame demon exhaled. The fire reached the level 3 wall and did not penetrate, did not redirect. The cold absorbed it at the contact point, consumed the thermal energy, neutralized it before propagation. The demon's output was being eaten at the boundary. Its posture changed. The certainty it had arrived with went somewhere else. Tenma told it that at level 0 he had nothing to protect in the conventional sense. He had come across the yard to take hits until he understood what it was. He understood now. He discharged every charge the broken critical crystal had accumulated through his fist into the fire barrier the demon threw up in the final half-second. The barrier and the demon behind it received the critical strike simultaneously, 10 times force, running through a perfectly tuned counter. The demon's coherence failed from the impact point outward. Before it dissolved, it said the one who sent them had already secured what they came for. Tenma was already running. The white ogre was gone when he came back through the workshop. Josuke had spent what he had to put it down. He was at the corridor wall, one hand braced against the stone, his breathing controlled but audible. Josuke's injuries were not minor, but Josuke had a professional relationship with not minor injuries, and he was still standing. The interior room was empty. The binding compound residue on the wall where Aiden had stood was the only evidence of his presence. The general's absence was the loudest thing in the room. Iberia was at the work table. The dragon gear was laid out in front of him, each piece in order, the full articulated set that Aiden kept in a locked cabinet with a prohibition stated 3 times across the course of their stay. Never wear it past 15 minutes, because the dragon soul bound at the armor's core crossed from instrument to owner the moment the timer ran out. The soul did not destroy the wearer from outside. It occupied the space from inside and waited for the architecture to become more its than theirs. Iberia's hands were on the chest plate. He was not looking at Tenma. He was looking at his father's workbench, the tools in their precise arrangement, each one in the exact position Aiden returned it to after every use. A craftsman's discipline so ingrained it had become the furniture of the space. He was looking at them with the attention of someone committing a room to memory. He said, without turning, that the general had a 4-minute lead. His father's knee had been bad since winter. The binding would release in approximately an hour, but in an hour the general would be well past the forest boundary. He was the only one among them with the aerial speed to close that gap. Tenma told him to stop. Iberia said the armor would give him the speed and the strength to reach the general, and a wind elementalist wearing dragon scales could fight at the level the general operated at. He said 15 minutes was enough to reach Aiden and extract him. He said it with the specific tone of someone who has run the arithmetic twice and does not fully believe their own answer, but has exhausted the alternatives. Tenma crossed the room and stood beside him and looked at the armor on the bench. The scales were dark green, overlapping with the precision of something built by a craft older than human metallurgy. At the joints, where articulation required a gap, a faint interior light pulsed in a rhythm that was not mechanical. It was a breathing rhythm. Something was already awake inside it. He said it was not 15 minutes past. It was past 15. The corruption began before the warning. Iberia was quiet. His mother had died when he was 9, slow rather than sudden, long enough that he had been old enough to understand what was happening and too young for understanding to provide any protection from it. She had told him, near the end, that kindness without sufficient strength to protect what you were being kind toward eventually became its own form of failure. He had been working out how to be both things at once since she said it. He picked up the helmet. Tenma said his name. Iberia said he was aware of what he was doing. Quietly, without drama, in the tone of someone who has made a decision in a private place that words could not fully reach. He asked Tenma to tell his father he had tried to get there in time. The helmet went on. The armor sealed itself at the joints. The light inside it changed color. The first minute looked like success. Iberia in the dragon gear was something extraordinary. The wind capability amplified past what his natural output could produce. The air around him unstable in a radius that tracked his intent without gesture. He cleared the compound exit and rose through the tree line before Tenma reached the yard. Tenma tracked him north by the distortion in the canopy. The trail moved fast, then it stopped. A sound came from the forest that was not a wind technique, lower in register than anything the armor should have produced, felt in the chest before it reached the ears. Something in the canopy moved, a shape rising through the upper branches, the wrong proportions, with a wingspan that sent birds off the treetops in every direction at once. The general's heading shifted, moving away from the forest. It had Aiden, and it was leaving. What had turned in the air above the tree line was no longer in pursuit. The thing that emerged from the canopy carried Iberia's face at the center of a form that had reorganized everything else. The armor had not shattered him. It had kept him as the visible core of something that was now also occupied by a dragon's mind sharing the same architecture. 2 presences, 1 body, and the stronger one was not the one that had put the armor on. The wind techniques came out wide and uncontrolled, striking without discrimination between target and context. The compound's outer wall took the first sweep, and 30 meters of it came apart. The North Forest absorbed the horizontal damage across a corridor wide enough for a road. Josuke pulled Tenma back from the debris line. Tenma told him to let go and went forward. He crossed the yard to the base of the thing that had been Iberia and looked up at it and did not back away. The dragon form's attention came down. One eye, Iberia's eye, still the right color, still recognizably his, tracked Tenma with a quality that was half recognition and half the searching confusion of someone trying to locate a memory that keeps slipping past reach. The strike came down fast. A wind slash wide enough to clear the yard in a single arc. Tenma walked into it. The black ice wall deflected the outer boundary of the technique while he moved through the center, inside the kill radius, at the point where the arc had already expanded past its peak damage concentration. He put his hand on the armor's chest plate. The piercing true sphere formed in his other hand and he pressed it against the breastplate's center and fired it through. The armor shattered. Not collapsed, shattered. The dragon soul's hold on the physical structure severed at its binding point, the dark green scales separating and falling in sequence from the shoulders downward. What remained inside was Iberia, ordinary again, small again, the way a person looks when everything that was not them has been stripped away. He fell, and Tenma caught him before the ground did. Iberia's breath was shallow. The dragon soul's tenure had consumed from the inside, damage that did not show clearly on the surface, which made it the kind that did not stop. His eyes were open and fully present, tracking Tenma's face with complete recognition. He asked if Tenma could get his father back. Tenma told him yes. He said it without a qualifier, without a hedge, in the way that people make promises they intend to die keeping. Iberia looked at him for a moment, the look of someone who believes what they are being told and is choosing to rest there. He said that was good. He said he was tired. His eyes stayed open a while longer. Then they closed, and his breathing did not continue, and the compound was quiet in the way that spaces become quiet when something has finished that cannot be undone. Tenma sat on the ruined ground between the armor's scattered pieces and held his closest friend, while the forest settled back into itself. His left eye felt nothing. His right eye did what his left one had not been able to do in 10 years. He let it. They buried him in the east garden of the compound, where a row of stones marked the property boundary. Josuke spent an hour with one of Aiden's smallest carving tools and a flat piece of workshop slate, working Iberia's name into the surface with the precision of a man who understood that what he was doing would outlast whatever else this day had produced. Tenma stood in front of the marker and said nothing for a long time. Josuke stood beside him. He was a man with a professional understanding of loss. Protection work accumulated its particular weight across years, and he did not reach for words to cover the silence. He was simply present in it. At some point, Tenma said he was going to get Aiden back. Josuke said he knew. Tenma put out his fist, the same gesture Iberia had used at the Stage District Registration Office, unguarded and immediate. Josuke looked at it. He brought his own fist against it, unhurried, and the contact lasted a second and carried everything that needed to be said. Menu arrived with a Northern Command response team the next morning and spent 40 minutes reviewing the compound and Josuke's perimeter account before he sat across from Tenma in the main hall and said anything at all. He told him plainly, going after the general and Aiden without specific preparation would not produce a rescue. It would produce a second prisoner. Tenma said he had not described himself as unprepared. Menu said there was a distance between unprepared and ready, and he was not yet at the ready end of it, and the gap was closable. He told him about the Apex Camp, an elite evaluation program in Nakasu that produced special grade candidates, brutal enough that most participants did not clear it on the first attempt. 6 weeks. Go in, complete it, come out ranked. Tenma asked what special grade gave him that he did not currently have. Menu said it gave him operational clearance to enter demon territory staging zones without the Alliance bureaucracy managing his movements through paperwork. It gave him allies who functioned at the threat level this situation required. And it gave his development a direction. At present, he was accumulating through every fight and stage he entered, building without a structured ceiling in sight. Special grade would focus that accumulation into something that produced results rather than quantity. He told Tenma that what happened to Iberia was not something more immediate strength would have prevented. What it could prevent, for anyone else, going forward, was becoming the kind of person who dictated the terms rather than responded to them. Tenma sat with that. 2 nights ago, at dinner in this compound, he had told Iberia the thing he rarely said aloud, that the one thing that genuinely frightened him was not monsters or the nature of his own fights. It was being the last one standing, the person remaining after everyone else was gone, with no direction to walk in. Iberia had looked at him across the table and said he was not going anywhere, said it with the easy confidence he applied to everything, and Tenma had not examined how much weight he had let that carry. He told Menu he would go to the Apex camp. Menu said Ageha would accompany him to Nakasu and serve as his contact point with Northern Command. She had already agreed. Ageha was outside the workshop when he came out. Her jade butterfly was folded against her shoulder with its wings down. Not the alert position it held during uncertainty, just resting. She looked at him with the attention she had brought to everything since the first meeting, but the evaluative component of it was gone. She had finished forming her opinion. It had landed somewhere settled. She said she was sorry about Iberia. He said he knew. Nothing more, and she did not need more. They left the compound in the early afternoon, the forest on both sides carrying the quiet of a place where something significant had occurred and the ordinary rhythms had not resumed. Ageha walked beside him. Her butterfly moved from her shoulder into the air ahead of them, drifting slowly, the jade color of its wings finding the available light through the canopy. 3 days to Nakasu. The Apex Camp's registration facility processed arrivals in a gymnasium-scale hall near the Eastern District. Long tables, assessment boards, a queue populated by fighters drawn from northern districts across the continent. The best results from every regional qualifier program, by most standard measures. People who had cleared significant thresholds to be standing in this room, and who carried the look of individuals who knew that. The queue moved. Tenma joined it. Near the south entrance, a group came through the doors. The man at their center was large, not the constructed proportion of a materialization elementalist, but the natural scale of someone assembled at a different baseline. He wore no alliance insignia on his registration materials, which for a person of that size and the specific quality of attention he generated in the fighters nearest to him, a subtle peripheral anchoring, the body's instinctive response to something it has assessed as significant, that absence meant he had chosen not to display credentials rather than lacking them. Someone ahead of Tenma in the queue recognized the family name and said it once, quietly, in the way people announce things they wish they did not have information about. Kinoshita. Rei's older brother carried the family resemblance in partial measures, the jawline, the angle of the head. But where Rei had worn his authority as a performance, this one carried it as a condition. He had not purchased his way into this room. Whatever he had done to earn the right to be here was visible in the way the room rearranged its awareness around him without being asked to. His gaze moved through the registration queue with the unhurried pace of someone locating a specific name on a list he had already memorized. When it reached Tenma, it stopped. The expression on his face was not Rei's fury, the disorganized anger of a person who has lost and cannot process the fact. This was something older and better maintained. Patience applied to a purpose, fully formed. He had arrived at the Apex camp with an objective already in place. That objective was standing 30 meters away in the registration queue. His expression said he was entirely comfortable with the time between now and whenever the moment arrived. He turned to the person beside him and issued a quiet instruction, not a request, a statement, with the implicit assumption that the statement would be acted on. He did not look at Tenma again after that. He did not need to. The communication had been made with the economy of someone who did not revisit what they had already said. Tenma turned back to the queue and moved forward with it. The Apex camp had not started yet. What it was going to produce, for every person in that registration hall, ally and enemy and everyone between, was still ahead. Tenma had a promise to keep when it ended. A grave in an east garden, a slate marker, a fist bump in the quiet after a burial. Everything between now and then was the cost of keeping it. He had paid higher costs than that. He intended to pay whatever this one required.